All right, take 9. Okay, I'm just going to skip whatever is going on in that picture. There's a bunch of people there. They're all very lovely people. They're developers that we're working with, and also our team. Okay, so the initial slides here are a little bit more kind of like what the mega booth is and how the whole thing functions. So I'll just kind of breeze through those a little quickly and then get on to the meat of it. So these are some of the recent showcases that we had been at. So Bit Summit, like I mentioned, is the event that we co-organize in Kyoto. This is the 3rd year that we've been helping run it and the 5th year that the show has been in existence, and is actually the first indie-focused video gaming event in Japan, which was really exciting for us to be involved in it. As I mentioned, we have also done showcases at GDC, E3, EGX, PAX East, PAX West. So when we decide to go to a show, we kind of have to figure out like what are the developers going to get out of it, what is the mega booth going to get out of it, what are the fans looking for. Like a good example would be when we did Gamescom a couple years ago. That's like, I don't know, 300,000 people go to that show. It's also, there's 10 or 11 halls that are all the size of like a small stadium. Companies buy, like, and they spend millions and millions of dollars. I think FIFA one year like built a soccer field or like a stadium inside of it. So going into it, I kind of thought that I knew what we were getting into when we first started it, but once you're actually there, it was very, very, very confusing for fans to understand what we were, because we were so incredibly small compared to everything else. We were also in a hall that was next to like people giving away keyboards and like a Chinese food restaurant and a cosplay area, and it was just like very, very mismatched for what we were trying to do. And so like for the developers, the business side of it was really, you know, good for them and it was important, but as far as like a fan consumer outreach side, it was a little mismatched. So when we do new showcases and we go to new places, we have to really keep in mind like what is everybody going to be getting out of it, and is it going to be a good fit? So the first step of this is, like I had mentioned before, that we do game curation. So we open up submissions. We do it about twice a year. We do one for the spring and one for the fall. So for the spring shows, submissions will start opening in the fall, so like about a month or so after PAX, because it takes us probably 6 or 7 months from start to finish to do the game curations. We get anywhere from like 200 to 400 games submitted every 6 months. There's some overlap between teams that apply for multiple shows. For some sort of context, I'm also the chairman for the IGF, which is the Independent Games Festival, which happens at GDC each year, and that gets about 700 to 800 game submissions once a year. So we are kind of on par with that overall per year, but like I said, there's some overlap. So going through all of those games can be really time-consuming, and we want to make sure that we're giving each submission the proper amount of time. We have multiple judges that work on it. And I'm really, really, really picky about doing all of this stuff by hand and not automating it, because I think that kind of ruins it at some point. So it is very, very time consuming. And then from there, then we start the planning and the logistics for the show. So how does Indie Mega Booth, fit into these events? Like, what is kind of the purpose of having us there? So initially, it was founded off the idea of being at PAX West when they had first opened up the 6th floor, and there was nothing up there. It was all merchandise, and Notch was showing scrolls, I think it was. I don't know, it was called something or other. I think he was getting sued for the name at the time. An argument with Bethesda about something. And that was pretty much the only thing that was up there. And so all these developers had put a lot of time and money and effort into creating these booth spaces, and then they weren't getting the traffic that they were expecting, and they kind of felt like left out, and it was a mismatch in what else was around in the space. So people would come up and kind of take a look around and be like, well, I don't want to buy a t-shirt, and then go somewhere else. So kind of born out of that frustration is like, how do you get noticed as a really small team and as a small game and somebody that doesn't have a lot of, kind of going into it with a lot of notoriety? Like, how do you get people to pay attention to you? So the concept is that we get people to pay attention to us by taking a whole bunch of us and plopping it down in the middle of the floor and then making it essentially unavoidable. So people would have to see us and have to take a look at the developers. So from that idea, we talked to the organizers for PAX, and then for PAX East that was in Boston, which is where I was living at the time, we were able to get a spot right in the middle of the entire show floor, and then they ended up expanding it, and so we were like literally in the middle. So we were next to like, some company had built a giant like 2-story tree, and there was like a dragon, and there was all this stuff, and then there was just a whole bunch of like, kind of bizarre little indie games at the time. And so what we did then was, by getting everybody to work together to help to promote the concept of being there and to give each other advice on how do you show your game and how do you market it, we were able to get more of an audience and more people to pay attention. So aside from the kind of like, collective marketing side of it, the other thing that we do as well is we do a lot of on-site event support, which when we first started off doing this, you don't realize that like, when you go and you show at a conference, you're literally just like, there's just concrete floor. There's nothing there. Like, carpet has to come from somewhere, electricity has to come from somewhere, internet comes from somewhere, signage has to be printed. And you don't realize the amount of details and information that needs to go into actually creating a space at a conference. And then on top of it, there's unions, there's vendors, there's systems and things that you don't really understand or that can be very complicated. And so what the Mega Booth has sort of turned into is a way to help to train new and younger developers on how to properly market and showcase their game and navigate this kind of bizarro system that is the convention circuit. And so then if things go wrong on site, we can go directly to a vendor, we can go to the organizers, we can like solve a problem. Whereas if you were just an unknown random person who just bought a booth space and then you needed somebody to pay attention to, you're also waiting in line against people who are spending millions of dollars on their floor space, or someone who's tired of hearing about 500 problems. So we can help with that as well. We also do a lot of work with bringing in equipment. We help with ordering up front to make sure that you actually have what you need when you show up, so that you don't get there and find out like, oh, oops, I didn't actually order electricity, so now I have no way to run my video game. And so from that, we've kind of expanded it outside of that to be a support network for, like I said, like business development work. But the initial idea was more of a like, this is complicated, this is really hard, but it's still an important grassroots way to meet an audience and to get your game out there and to network. And so it's important, even though it's difficult to do it. So as I mentioned about the number of developers that we work with, for a large US show, we're somewhere around like, I think PAX has like 150,000 people, I think, that come to it. As I mentioned, Gamescom is about 300,000. Tokyo Game Show, which is another big event that's in Tokyo, that's about 250, 270,000. Taipei Game Show is one of the biggest in the world, is 450,000 people. So it's almost 500,000 people, which seeing 300,000 people at Gamescom is kind of nauseating. So, I mean, that's a... but then to counteract that, like places like Bit Summit this past year, we had about 10,000 attendees. So a lot of times people will ask me, like, when is it appropriate to show my game, or when should I apply for PAX? And like the shorthand answer is you should apply for PAX when you want 100,000 people to look at your game. Like, if your game isn't at that point, you don't really need to be an event that's that big. So a lot of times we actually recommend that people go to small local events first. They get initial playback, like play testing and feedback, work with their local community, and then kind of like go up from there. Like, just saying like, okay, I'm just gonna make this game and I'm gonna show it at PAX and I'm gonna get a publisher and I'm gonna make it big, is kind of, you're skipping a lot of steps in there. So it's important to keep in mind, like I had mentioned, like where are you in the process, how big is your team, what are your resources. Showing at an event like PAX, we tell people to budget about $5,000 to $7,000, and this is not like, we don't upcharge anything. Like, our entire goal for the whole show is to just break even and just be at $0. And the Mega Booth itself functions off of sponsorships or donations or help from bigger, larger companies who want to support indie developers. We're not trying to make money off of people who don't have any money, which is the best piece of business advice I ever got. So you should keep that in mind. Like, just because you spend the money to go to a show like this doesn't mean that you're going to get, like, you're going to sell $7,000 worth of your game, or you're going to do X, Y, and Z. Like, you have to go into it and understand and set what your expectations are. So to get to kind of like a technical, what do I need, where I had mentioned about carpeting and electrical and all that fun stuff. So most bigger conventions will have like a booth, like a basic booth package. The black, like, it's called pipe and drape, and it's just because it is a series of pipes that they put drapes over. So normally you'll get something like that, like a skirted 6-foot table, 2 chairs, carpeting, 500 watts of electrical, and this is kind of a like, okay, now you can show up and you have your thing. PAX does it in 10 by 10 booths, which is 10 foot by 10 foot, so like about 100 square feet, which I'd say is like maybe about the size of the stage. Oh my God, I freaked out. I thought that it turned off again. So you can do like much larger spaces. Like, our overall space at PAX is, I think, 7,000 square feet. So we're made up of like large series of these 10 foot by 10 foot spaces. So it doesn't really like look like much. So if you see the picture, the one on the, I guess it's on the left, that's essentially what it looks like when you show up. So if you look at the right, that's a booth that's about already set up. You can see in the background somebody like brought in a cherry tree, I guess. So that's kind of the things that you're up against. So this, if you take a look at this one here, so this is Flint Hook, which is made by Tribute Games. And this is a second game of theirs, so they already kind of like have a little bit of notoriety. But if you look here, one of the things that's interesting with what they did is that you want to make sure that your staff is easily identifiable, that your game is visible, that your signage is large and it's easy to see from far away. So the guy who's talking here that's in the gray shirt is everyone on their team has these gray shirts so that you can identify who they are. They have the really big signage so that you know what the game name is. No. Go to the next one. Nope. They came back? Okay, I'm gonna stand like this. So this is Below by Cappy, and so even though the sign doesn't have a lot of stuff going on it, if you walked past this, you would know exactly what the name of the game is. It looks very inviting, so the TVs aren't turned on right now, but you can see there's like little ottomans that are set up in front of it, so it's a little more of a living room style, so it feels less like you're coming in like formally sitting and playing a game and more like you're having your friends over and you just happen to also be checking out this game in an event. There's tons and tons and tons of stuff that's going on at these events as well. Like I said, there's lots of music, people build giant structures, like you're competing with a lot of stuff, so you want to make sure that when someone walks by, they can actually understand what's happening. If you can guess what the name of this game is, it's Arena Gods. So this is another example of like very clear, easy to read signage. Something that I see a lot of actually, which doesn't seem like it should be a big deal, is really complicated to understand logos for companies or games. You want to think of a logo as something that you can be able to shrink down and put into social media. So when we redesigned the Indie Mega Booth logo, like what you see now, the little square with like the IMB, like that, it's easy to turn into an icon. It's easy to turn it into lots of different sizes. You can look at it from very far away. The font is very, very large. And we get a lot of developers who send us their logos and it says like 10 things in it, or the font is really hard to read and there's lots of stuff in the background. And what ends up happening is when you make signage, it can be confusing to figure out what the name of your game or your company even is. And if you shrink it down or you have to do something with it, it becomes almost like unreadable. So you want to be really careful to use something that is like very, very visually kind of stunning, so that you can understand, so people when they walk by can understand. I don't talk about it too much here, but another thing that I think developers don't focus a lot of energy on is getting really good screenshots. You should spend a lot of time getting screenshots that you put out for the public to look at. Like, I talked to a friend of mine where I think they took like 400 screenshots and they spent like 3 weeks going through them. This was like a bigger studio. But once that's out there, it's on the internet. Our old sign and our old logo still shows up in articles like just for PAX, and we had changed that maybe 3 years ago. If your screenshot looks really complicated and there's tons of stuff happening, it's going to do the same thing. Like, you want people to understand what is happening in your game and get this little like visual slice of it. So I think of your logo and your branding and your signage in a similar way. I Expect You to Die has some interesting signage. No. I think it's just like every other picture. Okay, we'll skip it. I said enough about signs. So going back a little bit to what I was saying with making the space inviting. So this game, Aeon Alter, which showed with us a few years ago at PAX East, they bought these really giant beanbag chairs. And so people were sitting in beanbag chairs and kind of hanging out and be able to have a good time. They had some chargers set up so you could sit and you could also charge your phone. This is something that we've done at GDC a couple times as well too, where we have couches, we have beanbag chairs, we have extension cords that we run. Because most of the time when people are at an event like that, like, they just really, really want to sit down. They've been standing for a really long time, they're walking around. If you give them somewhere comfortable, then they're going to stop and hang out and check out your game. Another big thing that makes it really inviting is you can buy carpet padding for underneath your carpet, which we always recommend it, and we always get 2 or 3 developers each time that are like, why should I spend $300 on carpet padding? And at the end of the 4 days, they're like, oh, I got it. Like, you stand on concrete for 4 days in a row for 8, 10, 12-hour days. Like, yeah, you're gonna feel it. If you've ever waitressed or done retail or something where you're standing all day long, like having that padding there actually does make a difference. And like I said, for the fans as well, it's kind of like having a little reprieve from running around. So this one here, this goes into a little bit with the kind of like audio visual side of it. No. Okay. Yeah, we'll skip those other ones. So this is from Thumper. This looks like he's getting, sucked into hallucinogenic void or whatever. But I'd say, honestly, the biggest visual difference I've ever seen in any booths is having a large TV versus just having like a small TV or a monitor to put your game on. We have gotten TV sponsorship actually from Intel on and off in the past, and those are like 42 to 60-inch TVs, which sound really gigantic. But we have had years where like we don't have them, or people just get 24-inch monitors, and I've seen the same game have like a quarter of the traffic with a 24-inch monitor as I've seen with a game that has like a 60-inch TV. The TV rentals can be super expensive at shows, like for a TV like that and a stand, because you want to get a stand that it will set up on top of it. It can be $600, $700 just to rent the TV and the stand, but the AV company will come, set it up for you. If it breaks, they have technicians that can come out and take care of it. The alternative is you could also just buy a TV, which is about the same amount of money, and loan it to a friend who lives there and just say, hey, 3 days a year I'm gonna need this TV, and then just let them have it. Which I've gotten a lot of TVs that way when I used to live in Boston. You can sell them on Craigslist at the end, you can raffle them off. There's plenty of ways. It's more of a time cost idea. Like, do you want to spend your setup time running to like the closest store and buying a TV and setting it up yourself, or do you have the funds to be able to pay for someone to do it? I always kind of recommend that people just rent the TV and do the carpeting. Like I said, if you're at a point where your company can't really spend, $8,000 or $9,000 on doing this sort of stuff, then maybe it's not at a point where that's actually has a cost value for you to be there, because like I said, you can't expect that immediate return on investment from what you're doing. So you could do something where you have a really unique design. So this is a game called Sound Self, which is a VR game where you meditate, I guess. And you meditate, and he calls it a technodelic. So the idea is that it's supposed to simulate what it's like to take hallucinogenics by playing VR. Yeah, so it's always a big hit. We actually had a show in Atlanta, and people were like freaking out over it. And so the setup that he does is he puts his tent up. There's a whole bunch of pillows on it. It like serves tea. It's very quiet. You like lay down. You have these like noise canceling headphones in, and so you go into this thing having like a totally different experience than what you're having in the rest of the show. And then by the time that you like are done with the game and you walk out and you're back into all of the craziness and all of the noise, it's kind of like it's an experience, right? It's like feels like something's transformative or something very different. I will say for a setup like this, you have to be careful on the regulations, like on fire and safety codes, so you have to check with the convention center if you're going to be doing something a little like weird. Serving tea is okay, but giving people food is actually not. Like there's a lot of, depends on the country and stuff that you're in as well too, so you kind of have to be careful. And closed-in spaces like this that kind of darken the area I've seen for horror games as well. And we had one where, I think it was called Outlast by Red Barrels, and it came out a couple years ago. And they had built like this, I don't know, it looked like a telephone box or something, and you would go into it. And somebody got so freaked out that they ran out the back of it and broke the back of the wall. So I guess keep that in mind. For some reason that becomes helpful for you in the future. Another thing that you can think of is if you don't have something that's more of like an experience style game, you can do something that engages people. So this game, Move or Die, if you look at the posters that are up there, they're little characters from the games and they're blank, and everybody that came up and played the game could draw their own character onto it. I've seen people make plywood walls and have everybody like graffiti it and put stickers on it and draw things, and then you can take it home at the end of the show, or you can raffle it off or give it to like a super fan. Or you can keep these, and use them on social media or do something fun with them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, like I said, like a really amazing experience as far as like gameplay-wise goes. And so then this game here, which says Jenny Le Coup Detective Vu, which is one of my favorite names for a game. It's point-and-click adventure, has cool art. So the lead artist, who is Sydney, who is here, she did live drawings of different characters in the game, and then projected her screen, like so you can see the projector there, they projected on the back, and so people could watch her live draw characters from the game, which was really engaging and interesting. And you can see here that they have sign up for the newsletter, which I think is super, super, super good idea to do. You want to try and capture as much of the audience as possible while you're there, so if you don't have a way for them to like sign up for a mailing list or immediately get engaged with you and with the game so that you can market it to them later, it's almost kind of a wasted opportunity. Like just giving out a flyer or giving out a business card. I forget what the comedian was, but it was basically like, he was like, when somebody gives you a flyer, you're basically saying, here, you throw this away. You know, so people do keep them, but they don't keep them for very long, and that can just kind of be like a throwaway. It should be in supplement to something like signing up for a newsletter or having something else that you can activate them right away on. So you can do things like contests, you know, you could do giveaways for Steam keys. Yeah, so this one they had like a challenge mode, and so I've seen, I've had a couple games do this where it's like you have high score over the course of the entire show or over the course of the entire day, and then whoever gets the high score wins a prize at the end. If you're at a point where you have like a publisher or a platform partner or something, you might be able to get some really interesting like swag as a giveaway or like a piece of equipment or something fun that would be exciting to be bringing people back. So then some other stuff that you would want to have is merchandise is always good. We even still we treat merchandise as a marketing expense and not as something that you make money off of. I'd say there's like Clay, you know, with Don't Starve, they make money off of their merchandise and they make money off of their IP. Like 99% of the other people that we know, nobody knows your IP well enough to be making money off of selling merchandise. But if the t-shirts are nice and they're soft and they're cool and they're cheap, people will wear them all over the place, and that is essentially free advertising for you. So I would look at stuff like merchandise and things like this more as a get your name out there, get your image out there, which goes again for the logo thing. If your logo is really complicated and weird looking, nobody's really going to wear it outside of a show. But if you have something that looks a little like really eye-catching or really like unique, or maybe a little more like kind of design heavy, I guess, people will just wear it, you know, around, which is why I think the Mega Boost shirts do really well. Is we kind of spring for the like soft tri-blend. It looks a little less like video game and more kind of like fashion-y. I've realized I'm a crazy, crazy person about our t-shirts. So another thing that you can do is swag and giveaways. So and this is a little bit like you kind of have to know the culture of the event that you're at. So if you look at the one with the fans, which you can't look at right now. Oh, did I come back? Did I come back? Okay. Yeah, so the fans, damn it. Okay, anyways, there are fans and buttons. So fans in shows in Asia especially are super, super popular as like a giveaway. So it's normally hot, it's pretty humid, and that's like a common thing that you'll see given away, whereas at places like PAX, pin collecting is really important. So if you kind of do a little bit of research on the culture around the fan side of the show that you're at, then you can make your swag something that people will be really excited about. So then the other thing that you need is definitely people to help you to run the event. So we have a series of volunteers. We have about 30 volunteers that help run shows for us, and we offer developers time like, hey, if you need to take lunch or you need to take a break, we can have a volunteer help you out. A lot of times people, I think, are so like kind of excited by it and they don't really want to leave their space, but you really, really, really need to hydrate. Like you need to drink water, you need to eat food, you need to sit. A lot of people lose their voice in the first day because they're talking very loudly over lots of stuff. And so throat lozenges, like the little like candies or something like that to help with your throat, I think is super important. But I think it's very physically difficult for one person to run a space like this at a large event. Like you should really, really try and have fans or volunteers or somebody there to help you run the space. This is going back a little on the essentials things. We actually keep like a whole kit of stuff that we ship around to different shows with us, and it includes things like always want to have duct tape, scissors, basic tools, water, the little throat drops, like pens, pencils, like all these sort of just random things. If you just start collecting them over like a course of a show, being like, oh, I wish I really had one of these, and just throw them in a box and take it with you to every show. I would say scissors and hex keys, for whatever reason, end up being like the thing that people need the most at shows. I think we bought probably 300 hex keys, and we are always out of them. Every weird like TV or tech thing needs a hex key for some reason. I think I'm running a little over on time, but I think that this one is super important. So designing a demo, I would say, is almost as important as what your physical space looks like. A lot of times you don't want to really kind of have the entire full game from start to finish available. It depends on what kind of game you have, but like for example, like RPGs are notoriously hard to show at events because you really don't understand what an RPG is like until you're like 40 hours into it. Which no one's going to sit down and play it that much. So a lot of times of what I've seen is either like a very kind of like interesting intro into it, like put a lot of time up front and maybe like the character creation or something that gives you kind of like a vibe of what the rest of the game is going to be, or start them off, like 2/3 of the way through it, like give them a character that has, leveled up in certain abilities, or they have cool, weapons or something, so that they can get a glimpse of an idea of what the game is going to be like in the future if they were to continue playing it. And then in other situations, like we had the Stanley Parable show with us a while back, and I had talked to Davey a bunch about what he wanted to do for a demo, because basically playing the game kind of ruins the game. So we talked it through, and what he ended up doing was create a demo that talked about it being a demo and about being at PAX, and kind of like, and it was very like, breaking the fourth wall and very self-referential, and it was a huge hit. Like people really loved it, and it got across the point of the game without you having to actually sit down and play the game and kind of like ruin the magic of experiencing it in that way. So you should really think about like, 10 to 20 minutes of really solid gameplay. No, many people aren't going to sit down and play for much longer than that, or if they do, you're going to start to back up on your stations. Try to include a lot of like analytics or like information where you can get on like where are people getting stuck. Make sure that it's easy to like restart it. If something goes wrong, it just goes back to it, and then maybe at the end it's like, hey, thanks for playing. Sign up for the mailing list. Another thing I'd like to point out is like, do not hover over people and tell them what to do in the game, because I definitely see that a lot, and you ruin a lot of opportunity for getting real feedback about gameplay if you're there and you're kind of helping people through it, because you're not going to be able to see areas where people get stuck or where there's mistakes or where it can be confusing if you're like physically there and helping somebody through the game. So as hard as it is, you should really just sit back and be observing and taking notes on how people are playing it, and then collecting as much analytical information from the gameplay experience itself. So then the other part of this is one of the main reasons to do a show like this is to start to build a community, and not only just a community of fans, but also a community of developers and people who can help to support you. And so a lot of times when we survey developers on why they work with the Mega Booth, I mean, half of it is because I want to go to PAX or I want to show my game off to the public, but the other half of it is that I want to meet other developers and I want to be a part of the community. And you can do a lot of really good networking and have a lot of good opportunities come out of a show like this if you're careful about how you're spending your time and you're smart about who you're working with and what's happening. So I would think of it, like I said, less of a like, I'm going to get X amount of money out of showing my game at this event, and more kind of like the soft side of it is like, it's inspiring for the team to see people play it and to understand what's happening with it. It gives you solid deadlines, like the event is gonna happen whether your build is ready or not. So it gives you a deadline, it gives your team something to kind of be excited and rally around. It gives you a chance to meet other developers and kind of get out of like your shell a bit. I know developers tend to sit and you're kind of like working in your own little space, to get out there and meet other people who are like you as well. And then, like I said, to build the fan side of it, make sure that you're doing something like a mailing list or you're capturing that audience in some way. Oh, yeah, I already talked about that. So some of the success stories that we've had are not up there, but one of them is Gang Beasts, Crypto the Necrodancer, and Mini Metro. Yeah. Hey, you came back. And so some of the things that made these games successful is that they had a very specific audience. They knew who that audience was. They focused solely on it. The game was very polished. They were really smart about who their partnerships were. And this is just kind of a general marketing advice, is when you see the way AAA games are marketed and games in general are, what they're doing is they have enough money that they can blast out to a very large general demographic. Whereas if you're an indie developer and your marketing funds are very limited, you should really just find exactly who is going to play your game and just spend all of your time focusing on that audience specifically. The idea of just kind of like that you're going to make a TV commercial or something that's going to be out there for the big general public and then just pick up random gamers is going to be really difficult. So like if you have a weird art game, like who would play weird art games? Like maybe people who go to art galleries, so like show your game off at like, get involved in like local arts communities and things like that. Like don't think of it necessarily as just like, I need to sell my game to like all these random people. Like really like who is going to play your game? A lot of times I think people, and this happens with events as well too, is that people I think assume their audience is like essentially themselves, and then they just kind of run with it, and then they don't really spend any time actually thinking about who will play this game and who will buy this game. Oh, sorry. I feel like I should end it on a little like happier note for that. So anyways, like I said, just to kind of recap a little bit, like really think about what shows you're going to and what you want to get out of them. Do you want to get play testing? Do you want to meet other people in your community? Do you want to network with publishers or platform holders? What stage is your game at? Is it a super early prototype? Are you about to launch? Are you post-launch and you're looking to get a little more visibility? Think about the visual aesthetic of what your space is going to look like. Make it inviting and make it comfortable. Make everything very, very easy to read, very simple. The kind of design aesthetic of like the website user is drunk, is a good thing. Is just assume that it's going to be hard for people to tell what's going on and what's happening. Make sure that you have people to help you. Bring a toolkit of as much stuff as possible. Think about your demo and what your demo is going to play like, what it's going to look like. What the experience is going to be, and then make sure you capture that audience afterwards. Yeah, so that is my brief overview of how to successfully show your indie game. So, thank you.